In the dusty training grounds of a military base where legends are born and heroes are forged, a SEAL commander with 20 years of combat experience watched something that everything he knew about warfare. His weathered hands gripped the binoculars as he witnessed shots that seemed impossible, precision that belonged in movies, not reality. The targets were dropping one by one, each shot placed with surgical accuracy that made seasoned snipers look like amateurs. But here's what shook him to his core. The figure behind the rifle wasn't one of his battle-hardened warriors. It wasn't a veteran with years of training. It was someone who, according to every rule book he'd ever read, shouldn't possess this level of deadly skill. Someone who was about to shatter every assumption about what it takes to be an elite marksman. The commander lowered his binoculars, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke words that would change everything. No woman shoots like that. But she just had. And what happened next would prove that sometimes the most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about who can become a legend. This is the story of how one person's extraordinary gift challenged an entire military establishment, redefined what elite marksmanship looks like, and proved that true talent recognizes no boundaries. It's a story about precision under pressure, breaking barriers that seemed unbreakable, and the moment when raw skill met opportunity in the most unexpected way possible. The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Commander Jake Richardson made his routine walk through the training facilities. 23 years in the Navy SEALs had taught him to notice everything, and this Tuesday morning felt different. The usual sounds of rigorous training echoed through the California air, but something else caught his attention: the sharp, consistent crack of rifle fire from Range 7, a section typically reserved for advanced marksmanship training. Richardson had seen it all during his decades of service. He'd trained some of the military's finest shooters, witnessed incredible displays of skill under pressure, and personally mentored snipers who went on to become legends in special operations. His own marksmanship credentials were impressive enough to earn respect from even the most elite circles. But as he approached Range 7, the pattern of gunfire struck him as unusual. The shots were too precise, too consistent, coming at intervals that suggested an almost mechanical level of accuracy. The range officer, Sergeant Martinez, was standing behind the shooting line with his arms crossed, staring downrange through high-powered binoculars. His expression was one of complete bewilderment, the kind of look Richardson had rarely seen on the face of a 20-year veteran who'd supervised thousands of shooting sessions. "What's the story here, Martinez?" Richardson asked, positioning himself next to the sergeant. Martinez handed over the binoculars without taking his eyes off the target area. "Sir, you need to see this for yourself. I've been doing this job for 2 decades, and I've never seen anything like it." Richardson raised the binoculars and focused on the 800-yard target downrange. What he saw made him pause. The target wasn't just hit, it was systematically destroyed. Each shot had landed within a grouping so tight that it looked like the work of a precision machine rather than a human shooter. The center of the target was completely obliterated, with holes clustered in a pattern that suggested almost supernatural accuracy. "Who's the shooter?" Richardson asked, lowering the binoculars slightly. "That's the thing, sir. It's not one of ours." Richardson turned his full attention to the firing line. There, in prone position behind a standard military rifle, was a young woman he didn't recognize. She couldn't have been more than 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and wearing civilian clothes that suggested she wasn't military personnel. Her stance was textbook perfect, but there was something else about her positioning that caught his experienced eye, a natural stillness that veteran snipers spent years trying to achieve. Sarah had been shooting competitively since she was 12 years old, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The invitation to demonstrate her skills at a military facility had come through her sponsor, a firearms manufacturer that supplied equipment to various government agencies. She'd been told it was a routine evaluation, a chance for military personnel to observe civilian marksmanship techniques. What she hadn't expected was the growing crowd of observers gathering behind the firing line. The rifle she was using wasn't even her preferred equipment. It was a standard military-issue M24 sniper weapon system, a reliable but basic tool compared to the customized rifles she normally used in competition. The scope was properly zeroed, but the trigger pull was heavier than she was accustomed to, and the stock dimensions weren't adjusted to her specifications. Despite these challenges, the targets continued to fall with remarkable consistency. Richardson watched as Sarah smoothly worked the bolt action, chambering another round with fluid efficiency. Her breathing pattern was perfect, the natural respiratory pause that all expert marksmen use to achieve maximum stability. But it was her follow-through that impressed him most. After each shot, she held her position for a full 3 seconds, allowing the rifle to settle naturally before beginning her next firing sequence. This level of discipline was something he'd struggled to teach even to his most promising students. "How long has she been shooting?" Richardson asked Martinez. "About 40 minutes, sir. Started at 300 yards, then moved back to 500, then 600. She's been at 800 yards for the last 20 minutes, and I haven't seen her miss the target once." Richardson studied the young woman more carefully. There was something about her demeanor that reminded him of his best snipers, a calm focus that seemed to shut out everything except the task at hand. She wasn't showing off or trying to impress anyone. She was simply executing each shot with methodical precision, treating each trigger pull as if it were the most important thing in the world. The wind had picked up slightly, a 5-7 crosswind that would affect bullet trajectory at this distance. Richardson watched as Sarah made a barely perceptible adjustment to her aim, compensating for the wind drift with the kind of intuitive understanding that usually took years to develop. The next shot rang out, and through the binoculars, he could see another perfect hit. "Has anyone her background?" Richardson inquired. Martinez consulted his clipboard. Sarah, age 26, competitive shooter from Oregon. She holds multiple national championships in long-range precision rifle competitions. Her sponsor arranged for this demonstration as part of a program to showcase civilian marksmanship excellence to military personnel. Richardson nodded, but his mind was racing. Competition shooting, even at the highest levels, was different from the kind of marksmanship required in combat situations. Competitive shooters had the luxury of controlled conditions, known distances, and unlimited time to prepare their shots. What he was witnessing seemed to transcend those limitations. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah suddenly shifted her position. Instead of maintaining the comfortable prone stance she'd been using, she smoothly transitioned to a kneeling position, then to standing offhand. These were exponentially more difficult shooting positions, requiring exceptional muscular control and breath management. Most military snipers struggled to maintain accuracy in these positions even at moderate distances. The first shot from the standing position rang out, and Richardson immediately focused his binoculars on the target. Another center hit. The second shot followed, then a third, each one finding its mark with the same devastating accuracy she demonstrated from the prone position. This wasn't just exceptional marksmanship. This was something approaching the realm of the impossible. "Sir," Martinez said quietly, "in all my years of running this range, I've never seen anyone shoot like that. Not our best snipers, not the Marines, not even the special operations guys who come through here for training." Richardson was beginning to understand Martinez's bewilderment. He'd worked with some of the most elite shooters in the military, individuals who'd proven themselves in the most demanding combat situations. What he was witnessing challenged his understanding of what was achievable with a rifle and human skill. Sarah completed her string of shots from the standing position and safely cleared her weapon. She'd been shooting for nearly an hour, and Richardson expected to see signs of fatigue or loss of concentration. Instead, she appeared as composed as when she'd started. She checked the rifle's chamber, engaged the safety, and placed the weapon in a secure rest with the same methodical care she'd shown throughout the session. As she stood up and began removing her ear protection, Richardson made a decision that would change both of their lives. He walked down to the firing line, his mind already considering possibilities that seemed too extraordinary to be real. "Miz," he called out as he approached. Sarah turned toward him, and Richardson immediately noticed her eyes calm, intelligent, and completely unaffected by what she just accomplished. She didn't seem to grasp that she just demonstrated a level of marksmanship that conventional understanding. "I'm Commander Richardson," he said, extending his hand. "I oversee special operations training here at—" Sarah shook his hand with a firm grip. "Sarah, thank you for allowing me to use your facilities, Commander. This is an incredible range setup." Richardson smiled slightly. After what he just witnessed, her modest demeanor was almost surreal. "Miz, I've been training and evaluating marksmen for over 2 decades. What you just demonstrated is extraordinary." Sarah seemed genuinely surprised by his comment. "I appreciate that, sir, but I was just doing what I normally do in competition. The conditions here are actually quite favorable: minimal wind, good lighting, excellent range facilities." "What you normally do," Richardson repeated, processing her words. If this was normal for her, the implications were staggering. "Miz, would you be interested in discussing some opportunities that might put your skills to better use?" Sarah looked puzzled. "What kind of opportunities?" Richardson glanced back toward the observation area, where a small crowd of military personnel had gathered to watch the demonstration. Among them were several special operations officers whose opinions he valued highly. Their expressions told him everything he needed to know. They'd seen what he'd seen, and they were equally stunned. The kind that serve a purpose beyond competition, Richardson said carefully. The kind that save lives. 3 weeks after the demonstration at Range 7, Sarah found herself in a conference room that screamed government bureaucracy. The walls were painted in that particular shade of beige that only existed in military facilities, and the fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across a polished table, surrounded by men in various uniforms. Commander Richardson sat to her left, occasionally glancing at the thick folder of paperwork that had accumulated since their first meeting. Across from them, Admiral, the base commander, reviewed Sarah's shooting scores with the methodical attention of someone who'd built his career on being extremely careful about unconventional decisions. The numbers on the page were extraordinary, but numbers could be fabricated or misinterpreted. What couldn't be disputed were the witness accounts from 17 different military personnel who'd observed Sarah's performance over multiple sessions. "Ms. Admiral began, setting down the reports, what you've demonstrated is remarkable. However, integrating civilian contractors into specialized military operations presents unique challenges." Sarah had spent the past 3 weeks learning about those challenges. The background checks alone had required her to account for every significant relationship and activity from the past decade. Her financial records, employment history, and even her social media activity had been scrutinized with the thoroughness typically reserved for individuals seeking the highest levels of security clearance. The process had been eye-opening. Sarah had always considered herself a private person, but the investigation revealed how thoroughly the government could examine someone's life when they wanted to. Friends and former colleagues had been interviewed. Her shooting instructors from her teenage years had been contacted. Even her college roommate had received a visit from investigators asking about Sarah's character and potential security risks. "I understand the complications," Sarah replied. "Commander Richardson has explained the unusual nature of what you're proposing." What they were proposing was indeed unusual. The military had a well-established system for training and certifying snipers, a process that typically took months or years of intensive instruction. Sarah's skills suggested she could bypass much of this training, but the question was whether her civilian background would translate effectively to military operations. Captain Williams, the Special Operations Training Director, leaned forward in his chair. "Ms. Competitive shooting and combat marksmanship are fundamentally different disciplines. In competition, you have perfect information about distances, wind conditions, and targets. In operational environments, you might need to make life-or-death shots with incomplete information under extreme stress." Sarah nodded. She'd given this considerable thought since Richardson's initial approach. "Captain, I understand the differences, but I believe my experience is more applicable than it might appear. In high-level competition, the pressure is intense. The difference between first and second place can come down to a single shot, with thousands of people watching and significant prize money at stake. But no one's shooting back at you in competition, Williams countered. That's true, Sarah acknowledged, but I've trained extensively in various conditions. I've shot in extreme weather at unknown distances and with equipment I've never used before. The fundamentals of marksmanship don't change just because the environment becomes more challenging. Commander Richardson had been quietly observing the exchange, and he chose this moment to intervene. Admiral, if I may, we've conducted some additional testing since our initial meeting. Gestured for him to continue. We arranged for Ms. to participate in some scenario-based training exercises. Nothing involving actual combat, but situations designed to test her performance under stress and with limited information. Richardson opened a separate folder and pulled out several photographs. The images showed targets at various distances in a complex training facility designed to simulate urban environments. This is from last Tuesday's exercise. We placed targets at unknown distances between 300 and 900 yards throughout our urban warfare training facility. Ms. was given a standard military rifle with basic optics and told she had 20 minutes to engage as many targets as possible. The Admiral studied the photographs. Each image showed a target with precise shot placement, and the notations indicated the distances and environmental conditions for each engagement. She identified and successfully engaged 17 targets in 18 minutes, Richardson continued. Average shot time was 37 seconds from target identification to trigger pull. No misses. Captain Williams examined the photographs more closely. These are impressive results, but they're still from a controlled environment. Sarah understood his skepticism, but she also knew her own capabilities. Captain, would it be possible to design a more challenging test? Something that better replicates the unpredictability of actual operations. Williams exchanged glances with Admiral. The suggestion was intriguing but problematic. Creating realistic combat scenarios for a civilian presented obvious safety and legal issues. "What did you have in mind?" asked. Sarah had been thinking about this question since her first meeting with Richardson. In competition, one of the most challenging disciplines is called unknown distance. Shooters are presented with targets at unmarked ranges and must estimate distances, calculate ballistics, and engage successfully. Could we combine that concept with time pressure and environmental challenges? Richardson smiled slightly. He'd hoped Sarah would suggest something along these lines. Actually, Admiral, we've already been developing something similar. Our special operations units train with what we call dynamic scenario exercises. Unpredictable target presentations, varying weather conditions, time constraints, and stress inoculation techniques. Stress inoculation, Sarah asked. Methods for simulating the physiological and psychological stress of combat without actual danger, Williams explained. Intense physical exercise before shooting, loud noises, smoke, multiple objectives competing for attention. Techniques that test whether your skills hold up when your heart rate is elevated and your focus is divided. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. This was far beyond anything she'd experienced in competition, but it was exactly the kind of challenge that would prove whether her skills could translate to military applications. Admiral was considering the proposal carefully. The military had invested enormous resources in developing elite snipers, and the traditional training programs had proven effective over decades of refinement. However, the results they'd observed from Sarah suggested she might represent a shortcut to capabilities that normally required years to develop. "If we were to arrange such a test," said slowly, "it would need to be comprehensive. Not just marksmanship, but decision-making under pressure, target identification, rules of engagement scenarios, the complete package." "I understand," Sarah replied, "and I appreciate that this isn't just about shooting accurately. It's about using those skills responsibly in situations where the stakes are much higher than any competition." Commander Richardson had been hopping for this kind of response. Sarah's technical skills were extraordinary, but her attitude toward the responsibility that came with those skills was equally important. Too many individuals with exceptional abilities lacked the judgment needed to use them appropriately. Over the following hour, they outlined a testing protocol that would challenge every aspect of Sarah's capabilities. The scenarios would include target identification challenges, where she'd need to distinguish between threats and non-combatants in complex environments. Time-critical situations where delayed action could result in mission failure. Equipment failures that would test her adaptability and problem-solving abilities. The psychological evaluation would be equally comprehensive. Military psychologists would assess her decision-making processes, stress responses, and ability to function as part of a team. Her competitive background demonstrated individual excellence, but military operations required seamless coordination with other personnel. "There's one more consideration," Admiral said as the meeting began to wind down. "If you succeed in these evaluations, Ms., you'd be entering a very small and very exclusive community. Military snipers operate under strict codes of conduct and confidentiality. The training you'd receive and the operations you might participate in would require absolute discretion." Sarah had understood from the beginning that this path would fundamentally change her life. Her competitive shooting career had brought her a certain amount of recognition in civilian circles, but military service would require stepping away from that public visibility. The skills she developed for personal achievement would be redirected toward national service. "I've given that considerable thought, Admiral. I understand the commitment involved." Nodded. "The evaluation process will begin next Monday. It will last for 2 weeks and will be more intensive than anything you've experienced. If you have any reservations, now is the time to express them." Sarah looked around the room at the faces of men who'd the alarm pierced through Sarah's sleep at 4:30 a.m. on the 7th day of her evaluation. This wasn't the planned wake-up call, something was different. Instead of the routine schedule she'd become accustomed to, urgent voices echoed through the hallway outside her temporary quarters. She dressed quickly, sensing that this morning would test everything she'd learned during the most intense week of her life. The past 6 days had systematically demolished every assumption Sarah had held about her own capabilities. The military's approach to stress testing went far beyond anything she'd imagined. Yesterday's exercise had required her to complete a challenging obstacle course while carrying full gear, then immediately transition to precision shooting with her heart rate above 160 beats per minute. The day before, she'd spent 8 hours in a simulated hostage scenario where split-second decisions about target identification could mean the difference between saving innocent lives and tragic mistakes. Commander Richardson appeared in her doorway, his expression more serious than she'd seen during their previous interactions. "Sarah, we've got a real-world situation developing. This isn't part of your evaluation, but your skills might be needed." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with uncertainty. What kind of situation? Cargo vessel, approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast, has been taken by pirates. 7 crew members being held hostage. The initial rescue attempt failed when the pirates detected the approaching boats and moved the hostages to a more secure location on the ship. Richardson handed her a tablet displaying satellite imagery of a large cargo vessel surrounded by smaller naval craft. Red markers indicated the last known positions of the hostages, while green markers showed the locations of the rescue team. "The problem is that the pirates have positioned themselves where our standard approach won't work. They're in the ship's superstructure, approximately 180 feet above the main deck, with clear in all directions. Any conventional assault would put the hostages at extreme risk." Sarah studied the imagery, her competitive shooting background automatically analyzing the technical challenges. What's the engagement distance? That's the issue. Our boats can't get closer than 800 yards without being detected. The shot would be from a moving platform to a target 180 feet above sea level, with variable wind conditions and limited visibility into the target area. Sarah understood why Richardson was explaining this to her. 800 yards from a moving boat to an elevated target was beyond the capability of most military snipers, even under ideal conditions. The technical challenges were enormous, and the consequences of failure couldn't be more serious. "Has anyone attempted the shot?" "Our best sniper made 3 attempts from different positions. The movement of both boats made it impossible to achieve the precision necessary. He came close, but close isn't acceptable when hostages are involved." Richardson paused, studying Sarah's expression carefully. "Sarah, I need to be completely clear about what I'm suggesting. This isn't training. This isn't evaluation. This is a real operation where 7 people's lives hang in the balance. If you're not absolutely certain about your capabilities, now is the time to say so." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Everything she'd trained for, everything she'd demonstrated during the past week, had led to this moment. But the gap between proving herself in controlled scenarios and taking action where human lives were at stake felt enormous. "What equipment is available?" Richardson smiled grimly. Whatever you need. We've got the latest sniper systems, various ammunition types, environmental monitoring equipment, and a platform that's been specially stabilized for long-range shooting. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, mentally reviewing everything she'd learned about shooting from unstable platforms. The past week's training had included extensive work on the mechanical boat that simulated the motion of various watercraft. She'd achieved acceptable accuracy, but this situation would test the absolute limits of what was possible. "I need to see the actual conditions," she said. "The wind patterns, the motion characteristics of our platform, and the most recent imagery of the target area." Richardson nodded. "The helicopter is waiting." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself in a military helicopter racing toward the Rescue Operations Command Center aboard the USS Hampton, a guided missile destroyer serving as the floating headquarters for the ongoing crisis. The flight provided her first real view of the cargo vessel, and the technical challenges became immediately apparent. The pirated ship was significantly larger than she'd realized from the satellite imagery. The superstructure where the pirates had positioned themselves was a complex maze of equipment, ventilation systems, and structural elements that would make target identification extremely difficult. Worse, the morning sun was creating shadows and reflections that would complicate accurate shooting. Captain Torres, the operation commander, briefed Sarah as soon as the helicopter landed on the destroyer's flight deck. "Ms., I want to be frank with you. We've been working on this situation for 8 hours, and conventional approaches have failed. The pirates have made it clear that any further rescue attempts will result in the immediate execution of hostages." Sarah studied the latest intelligence reports while listening to Tor's briefing. The pirates were professional, well-equipped, and demonstrating tactical awareness that suggested military training. They'd chosen their defensive positions carefully, maintaining cover while keeping clear to monitor approaching threats. "What's the timeline?" Sarah asked. "We have approximately 3 hours before the deadline they've set for their ransom demands. If those demands aren't met, they've threatened to begin executing hostages at 30-minute intervals." Sarah felt the pressure of the ticking clock, but she forced herself to focus on the technical aspects of the challenge. Emotional reactions would only compromise her ability to perform when precision was absolutely critical. The shooting platform was a specially modified smaller vessel that had been designed for exactly this type of long-range engagement. Sophisticated stabilization systems minimized the effects of wave motion, while advanced environmental monitoring equipment provided real-time data about wind conditions, humidity, and temperature changes that would affect bullet trajectory. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, the Navy's master sniper instructor, walked Sarah through the platform's capabilities. "Ms., this system represents the most advanced shooting platform we've ever developed. The stabilization reduces platform movement by approximately 85%, and the ballistic computer can calculate environmental factors in real time." Sarah examined the rifle she'd be using, a custom system firing match-grade ammunition, specifically designed for extreme-range engagements. The scope was equipped with advanced ranging and ballistic calculation features, but ultimately, the success of any shot would depend on human skill and judgment. "I need to practice with this setup," Sarah said. "At least a few shots to understand how the platform behaves and how the rifle performs." Martinez nodded. "We've arranged for that. There's a target vessel approximately 900 yards from our current position, with targets set up to simulate the conditions you'll face." The practice session revealed both the capabilities and limitations of the shooting platform. The stabilization system was remarkable, reducing the motion that had made accurate shooting nearly impossible for previous attempts. However, Sarah discovered that the system had a slight delay in responding to wave motion, creating a rhythm she needed to understand and compensate for. Her first practice shot missed the target by 6 inches, a significant error at this range. The second shot was closer, and by the fifth shot, she was consistently hitting the center of the target. But the practice targets were stationary, clearly visible, and presented none of the complications she'd face in the actual engagement. Commander Richardson observed the practice session from the bridge, monitoring both Sarah's performance and the ongoing negotiations with the pirates. The deadline was approaching, and the pirates were becoming increasingly agitated as time passed without their demands being met. "Sarah," Richardson called over the radio, "we're running out of time. The pirates just moved one of the hostages to a visible position as a show of their seriousness." Sarah acknowledged the communication while maintaining her focus on the final practice shots. She needed to understand every nuance of the platform's behavior, every characteristic of the rifle and ammunition, because there might only be one opportunity to save the hostages. The practice session concluded, and Sarah found herself being briefed on the specific tactical situation aboard the cargo vessel. Intelligence operatives had managed to determine the approximate positions of both the pirates and hostages, but the information was incomplete and constantly changing. "The lead pirate has positioned himself near a window on the port side of the superstructure," Captain Torres explained, pointing to architectural drawings of the ship. "He's maintaining visual contact with our vessels while keeping a hostage in close proximity. It's a difficult shot because of the angle, the distance, and the need to ensure the hostage isn't harmed." Sarah studied the diagrams and photographs, visualizing the geometry of the shot. The target would be partially concealed, moving unpredictably, and positioned near an innocent person whose safety was paramount. These were exactly the complications that separated theoretical marksmanship from real-world applications. As the shooting platform moved into position for the actual engagement, Sarah felt a calmness settle over her that she recognized from her most successful competitions. The external pressures and distractions seemed to fade away, leaving only the essential elements: the target, the wind, the platform motion, and the fundamental mechanics of accurate shooting. Through the scope, she could see the cargo vessel's superstructure clearly. The target window was visible, and occasionally she caught glimpses of movement inside. The range finder confirmed the distance at 847 yards, with a slight crosswind and the morning sun creating challenging lighting conditions. "Target identified," Sarah reported over the radio. "I can see movement in the target area, but I need a clear presentation to ensure hostage safety." The radio crackled with communications between the command center and the negotiation team. The plan was to create a distraction that would draw the pirate to the window while ensuring the hostage was moved to a safer location. "Sarah, you'll have a window of approximately 30 seconds when the target presents himself clearly. Are you ready?" The radio crackled to life at exactly 10:47 a.m. "Execute, execute, execute." Sarah's world contracted to a space no larger than her scope's field of view. 847 yards away, through the cargo ship's superstructure window, she could see the pirate leader as he moved into position. The distraction had worked perfectly. An apparent equipment malfunction on one of the naval vessels had drawn his attention, causing him to lean toward the window for a better view while shouting instructions to his companions. The target presentation was clear but brief. Sarah could see approximately 60% of the pirate's torso through the window frame, his rifle visible as he gestured toward the naval vessels below. Most importantly, the hostage had been moved away from the window area, eliminating the risk of collateral harm. Sarah's breathing fell into the rhythm she'd perfected over thousands of competition rounds. Her heart rate, despite the enormous pressure, remained steady at 72 beats per minute. The platform's stabilization system had synchronized with the ocean swells, creating a window of minimal movement that lasted approximately 4 seconds with each wave cycle. Through the scope, she could see the crosshairs settle naturally on the target area. The ballistic computer had calculated the environmental factors: wind speed 8 from the southwest, temperature 67 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 73%, and a slight upward angle to compensate for the target's elevation. The bullet would travel for approximately 1.2 seconds, during which time both the platform and the target could move. At the peak of her respiratory pause, Sarah applied steady pressure to the trigger. The rifle recoiled smoothly, and she maintained perfect follow-through, keeping the crosshairs on target for 3 full seconds after the shot broke. The bullet's flight time felt eternal. Through the scope, Sarah watched the pirate continue his movement, unaware that his fate had been sealed 1.2 seconds earlier. Then, suddenly, he dropped from view. "Target down," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. The radio exploded with communications as the assault team moved to capitalize on the successful elimination of the primary threat. The remaining pirates, shocked by the sudden loss of their leader and unable to determine where the shot had originated, hesitated long enough for the Special Operations Team to begin their coordinated assault on the cargo vessel. Commander Richardson's voice came through Sarah's earpiece. "Outstanding shot, Sarah. The assault team is moving now." Sarah maintained her position, scope trained on the superstructure to provide overwatch for the rescue operation. Through the advanced optics, she could see the remaining pirates attempting to reorganize their defense, but the psychological impact of their leader's elimination had clearly shaken their confidence. The rescue operation unfolded with the precision that characterized elite military units. Flashbang grenades created disorientation, while the assault team breached multiple entry points simultaneously. Within 8 minutes, radio reports confirmed that all remaining pirates had been neutralized and the hostages were secure. All hostages recovered safely, came the final report. 7 souls accounted for, all in good condition. Sarah finally allowed herself to relax, setting the rifle in its rest and removing her eye from the scope. The successful completion of the mission felt surreal after the intense focus required for the shot. Around her, the crew of the shooting platform was celebrating, but she found herself processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Chief Petty Officer Martinez approached with a broad smile. "Ms., in 30 years of military service, I've never seen a more crucial shot executed with such precision. That was extraordinary marksmanship under the most demanding conditions imaginable." Sarah nodded, still feeling the residual effects of the adrenaline and intense concentration. "Thank you, Chief. The platform performed flawlessly and the intelligence was accurate. Everything came together." As they returned to the USS Hampton, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that first demonstration at Range 7. The competitive shooting that had defined her identity for over a decade now seemed like preparation for this moment, when her skills had literally saved lives. Admiral was waiting when the helicopter landed on the destroyer's flight deck. His expression was serious but satisfied, the look of a commander who'd witnessed his personnel perform exceptionally under the most challenging circumstances. "Ms.," he said as she disembarked, "what you accomplished today represents a level of marksmanship that few individuals could achieve under any conditions, let alone in a high-stakes operational environment. You've proven that your skills translate directly to military applications." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and humility. "Admiral, I was fortunate to have exceptional support, excellent equipment, and accurate intelligence. The success belongs to everyone who made this operation possible." Smiled. "That response tells me as much about your character as your shooting tells me about your abilities. You understand that individual excellence only matters when it serves a larger purpose." Over the following hours, as the rescued hostages were transported to safety, and the investigation into the piracy incident began, Sarah underwent an extensive debriefing. Military analysts wanted to understand every aspect of her shooting technique, decision-making process, and stress management under extreme conditions. The questions were detailed and technical, covering everything from her breathing pattern to her mental preparation routine. The military was clearly interested in understanding whether her performance could be replicated or taught to other personnel. "Ms.," asked Major, the behavioral specialist conducting part of the debriefing, "how did you maintain focus during such an emotionally charged situation? The knowledge that 7 lives depended on your accuracy would be overwhelming for most individuals." Sarah considered the question carefully. "Major, I think my competitive background actually helped with that aspect. In major competitions, the pressure is intense, and I've learned to compartmentalize emotions and focus entirely on the technical execution. The stakes were certainly higher today, but the fundamental mental approach was similar. The debriefing revealed that Sarah's performance exceeded the expectations of even her strongest supporters within the military. The combination of technical precision and calm decision-making under pressure had proven that her abilities weren't limited to controlled training environments. Commander Richardson joined her for the final portion of the debriefing, and Sarah could see satisfaction in his expression. "Sarah, when I first watched you shoot at Range 7, I suspected you had exceptional abilities. Today proved that those abilities can be applied to the most demanding operational requirements." As evening approached and the immediate crisis concluded, Sarah found herself in Admiral's office for a conversation that would determine her future role within the military structure. The successful rescue operation had created opportunities that hadn't existed before, but it had also raised new questions about how to best utilize her unique capabilities. "Ms. began, today's operation was a complete success, and your contribution was essential. However, this kind of crisis doesn't occur frequently. We need to consider how to best employ your skills within our regular operational framework." Sarah had been thinking about this question throughout the debriefing process. Her demonstration of capabilities under real-world conditions had proven her value, but she understood that military service involved much more than occasional high-profile operations. "Admiral, I'm interested in contributing however I can be 18 months after the cargo ship rescue." Sarah stood before a group of military snipers at the Advanced Marksmanship Training Center, a facility that had been established specifically to study and replicate the techniques that had made her successful. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the classroom, where she was about to deliver a lecture on precision shooting under extreme conditions. The faces looking back at her represented some of the most elite marksmen in the military. These were individuals who had already proven themselves in combat, completed the most demanding training programs, and earned recognition as experts in their field. Yet they were here to learn from a former competitive shooter who had transformed military understanding of what was possible with a rifle. "Today we're going to discuss something that most training programs don't address," Sarah began, clicking to the first slide of her presentation. "The difference between shooting accurately and shooting decisively under pressure." The slide displayed telemetry data from her shot during the hostage rescue operation: heart rate, breathing pattern, platform motion, and environmental conditions, all captured in real time during those crucial seconds. The data revealed the physiological state that had enabled such extraordinary performance under extreme pressure. Master Sergeant, a 20-year veteran with multiple combat deployments, raised his hand. "Ma'am, your heart rate during the actual shot was lower than most of ours during training exercises. How do you maintain that level of calm when lives are at stake?" Sarah smiled, remembering when she'd first asked herself the same question. "Sergeant, the answer isn't about eliminating stress, it's about transforming stress into focus. When I competed nationally, thousands of people would be watching, prize money was at stake, and sponsors were evaluating my performance. I learned that pressure is just another environmental factor to manage, like wind or temperature. The training program that had evolved around Sarah's techniques was revolutionary. Traditional military sniper training focused heavily on technical skills and equipment proficiency, but the new approach incorporated psychological conditioning, stress inoculation, and decision-making under uncertainty that reflected real operational requirements. Captain Hayes, the program director, had initially been skeptical about integrating civilian competitive techniques into military training. However, the measurable improvements in student performance had silenced most criticism. Graduates of the new program consistently outperformed their peers in operational scenarios, demonstrating not just superior accuracy, but better judgment under pressure. The key insight, Sarah continued, advancing to the next slide, is that exceptional marksmanship isn't just about controlling your rifle, it's about controlling your mind. Everything we'll practice over the next 2 weeks is designed to develop that mental control. The curriculum she'd helped develop was grueling. Students underwent intensive stress conditioning while maintaining shooting accuracy, decision-making exercises with incomplete information, and scenario training that replicated the chaos and uncertainty of actual operations. Many experienced snipers found the psychological demands more challenging than the physical requirements. After the morning lecture, Sarah walked through the advanced training facility that had become her second home. The ranges were equipped with technology that would have seemed like science fiction just a few years earlier. Environmental simulation systems, moving targets that replicated human behavior, and scoring systems that measured not just accuracy, but decision timing and target selection. Commander Richardson appeared beside her as she observed a group of students working through a complex urban scenario. His hair was grayer now, but his enthusiasm for the program remained as strong as when they'd first met at Range 7. "Sarah, I've got news from Washington. The program has been approved for expansion to all special operations units. They want to implement your training methodology across the entire special operations community." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and responsibility at the news. The techniques she developed had proven successful in this controlled environment, but expanding them to thousands of personnel would present new challenges. "That's exciting, Commander, but also somewhat overwhelming. Are we confident that the approach will scale effectively?" Richardson nodded. "The results speak for themselves. Graduates of this program are performing at levels we've never seen before. The hostage rescue operation 18 months ago wasn't a fluke. It was a demonstration of what's possible when exceptional natural ability meets proper training and support." The expansion would require Sarah to travel to military bases around the world, training instructors who would implement her methods with their own students. It represented an opportunity to influence military marksmanship training on a global scale, but it also meant accepting responsibility for the performance of thousands of personnel she'd never meet personally. That evening, Sarah found herself in her office reviewing applications for the next advanced training cycle. The program had developed a reputation that attracted the most motivated individuals from across the military, but it also attracted those who believed they could shortcut the traditional training process. Among the applications was one from Lieutenant, a Marine sniper who'd served 3 combat deployments and held several military marksmanship records. His motivation statement was particularly compelling. "Ma'am, I've been shooting professionally for 8 years and thought I understood what excellence looked like until I saw recordings of your performance. I want to learn not just how to shoot better, but how to think differently about marksmanship under pressure." Sarah smiled as she read's application. His attitude reminded her of her own mindset when she'd first encountered the military's approach to shooting. The recognition that there was always more to learn, always ways to improve, even after years of apparent mastery. The phone rang, interrupting her review of the applications. The voice on the other end was Admiral, calling from the Pentagon with news that would once again change the trajectory of her career. "Sarah, we've received a request from our allies for assistance with a situation that requires your specific expertise. I can't discuss details over the phone, but it's similar to the cargo ship operation, with even higher stakes." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied such calls. Despite the success of the training program, she'd continued to maintain her operational readiness, knowing that her unique skills might be needed for situations that conventional approaches couldn't handle. "When would I need to deploy, Admiral?" "The situation is developing rapidly. We'd need you ready to move within 6 hours." Sarah looked around her office, filled with training materials, student evaluations, and curriculum development projects. The academic side of her role had been rewarding, but the opportunity to apply her skills operationally remained the most compelling aspect of her military service. "I'll be ready, sir." 2 hours later, Sarah was aboard a military transport aircraft, flying toward a classified destination with a team of special operations personnel she'd trained. The mission briefing revealed a hostage situation involving diplomats from multiple countries, with technical challenges that exceeded anything she'd previously encountered. As the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The competitive shooting that had defined her early life now seemed like preparation for a role she'd never imagined possible. Her extraordinary marksmanship abilities had opened doors to military service, but it was her approach to training and developing others that had created a lasting legacy. The students she'd taught were now serving around the world, applying the techniques and mindset they'd learned to protect their fellow service members and complete missions that might otherwise fail. Her influence was multiplying through every person she'd trained, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond her individual capabilities. During the flight, Colonel Martinez, the mission commander, reviewed the operational plan with Sarah. "This situation is more complex than the cargo ship rescue. Multiple hostile groups, unclear hostage locations, and environmental conditions that will test every technique we've developed." Sarah studied the intelligence reports and satellite imagery, her mind automatically analyzing the technical challenges, while considering how to apply the lessons learned from 18 months of advanced training development. Colonel, what assets do we have for intelligence gathering and target identification? The most advanced surveillance equipment available, plus human intelligence assets who can provide real-time updates. However, the final shooting solutions will depend entirely on your ability to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. As the aircraft continued toward its destination, Sarah felt the familiar calm that accompanied her most challenging assignments. The pressure was enormous, the stakes were higher than ever, and the technical requirements would push her abilities to their absolute limits. But she also felt confident in a way that hadn't been possible during her first operational assignment. 18 months of training development, working with the military's best personnel, and continuous refinement of her techniques had prepared her for exactly this type of challenge. The competitive shooting that had brought her to the military's attention had been about individual achievement and personal excellence. The training program she developed had been about transferring knowledge and building institutional capability. This mission would combine both aspects, applying her individual skills while leading a team that represented the evolution of military marksmanship training. As the transport aircraft approached its destination, Sarah began the mental preparation routine that had become second nature. The extraordinary journey that began with a demonstration at Range 7 was about to reach another critical moment, where precision, training, and judgment would determine the success of a mission that could affect international relations. The SEAL commander had once said that no woman shoots like that. 18 months later, Sarah had proven that exceptional abilities, properly developed and applied, could redefine what was possible in the world of military marksmanship. More importantly, she'd shown that individual excellence could be transformed into institutional capability that would serve her country for years to come. The aircraft began its descent, and Sarah prepared for another opportunity to prove that when conventional approaches failed and lives hung in the balance, extraordinary individuals with proper training and support could achieve results that seemed impossible. Useful, whether that's training other personnel, equipment evaluation, or operational assignments, I'm committed to serving effectively. Nodded. We've been discussing several possibilities. Your shooting abilities are extraordinary, but your performance today also demonstrated leadership qualities and decision-making capabilities that suggest broader potential. The conversation continued for over an hour, exploring various ways Sarah's skills could be integrated into military operations. The traditional career paths for snipers didn't fully accommodate someone with her background and demonstrated abilities, requiring creative thinking about roles and responsibilities. As the meeting concluded, Sarah realized that her life had fundamentally changed in ways she was still beginning to understand. The competitive shooting that had brought her to the military's attention was now a foundation for something entirely different, a career dedicated to using her extraordinary abilities in service of her country. The success of the hostage rescue operation had proven that exceptional individuals could make crucial differences in the most demanding situations. Sarah had demonstrated that her remarkable marksmanship skills could translate directly to saving lives and completing missions that seemed impossible. Standing on the destroyer's deck as the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, Sarah looked toward the horizon and considered the future that was taking shape. The shot she'd made that morning had saved 7 lives, but more importantly, it had opened a path toward using her abilities in ways she'd never previously imagined. The competitive trophies and medals that had once defined her achievements now seemed like stepping stones toward something far more meaningful. Sarah had discovered that her extraordinary gift with a rifle could serve purposes beyond personal accomplishment, and the military had discovered that sometimes the most valuable assets come from the most unexpected sources. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new training requirements, and new opportunities to prove herself in different contexts. But today had established beyond question that when lives were at stake and conventional approaches failed, Sarah could deliver results that seemed to defy the limits of human capability. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the platform's rhythm and adjusting her breathing to match the stabilization system's cycle. The crosshairs were steady on the target window, and her finger rested lightly on the trigger. Ready, she confirmed. The next 30 seconds would determine whether months of preparation, years of training, and a lifetime of developing extraordinary skills would translate into saving 7 innocent lives. The morning sun glinted off the scope as Sarah prepared to take the most important shot of her life. Dedicated their careers to national defense, they were offering her the opportunity to use her skills in service of something larger than personal achievement, but they were also being completely honest about the challenges involved. "I don't have reservations," she said. "I have questions about specific procedures and protocols, but I'm committed to this process." Commander Richardson felt a sense of satisfaction that he hadn't experienced in years. He'd recognized something special in Sarah's shooting demonstration, but her response to this increasingly complex situation convinced him that his instincts had been correct. She possessed not only exceptional technical skills, but the character needed to use them appropriately. As the meeting concluded and participants began filing out of the conference room, Richardson lingered behind with Sarah. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once we begin the formal evaluation process, there's no going back to your previous life. Even if you don't complete the program, you'll have been exposed to information and training methods that will require ongoing security commitments." Sarah considered his question seriously. 3 weeks ago, she'd been focused on preparing for the next competitive shooting season, planning travel to matches across the country, and working with sponsors to develop new equipment. That life seemed distant now, replaced by possibilities she'd never seriously considered. "Commander, when I was 12 years old, my father took me shooting for the first time. He told me that marksmanship was about more than hitting targets. It was about discipline, responsibility, and the potential to make a difference when it mattered most. I've spent years developing these skills in competitions, but this is the first time someone's offered me the chance to use them for something that truly matters." Richardson smiled. Then I'll see you Monday morning at 600 hours. Wear comfortable clothes and bring your sense of humor. You're going to need it." As Sarah left the conference room, she reflected on how dramatically her life was about to change. The morning sun streaming through the hallway windows seemed brighter somehow, full of possibilities that hadn't existed when she'd first demonstrated her shooting skills 3 weeks earlier. She was about to discover whether her extraordinary abilities could translate into something even more extraordinary: the opportunity to serve her country in ways she'd never imagined possible. Sarah considered his words, and Richardson could see her quick intelligence processing the implications of his statement. She wasn't naive about the potential applications of her skills, but she'd never seriously considered them in a military context. "I'd be interested in hearing more," she said finally. Richardson nodded, already planning the conversations he'd need to have with his superiors. What he'd witnessed that morning would require some very unconventional thinking from the military establishment, but the potential was too significant to ignore. As they walked back toward the observation area, Richardson couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed something that would reshape his understanding of what was possible in the world of precision marksmanship. Sarah had demonstrated abilities that challenged everything he thought he knew about shooting, and he was beginning to realize that this was just the beginning. The targets downrange bore silent testimony to what had occurred: clusters of holes so tight and precise that they looked like the work of a machine rather than a human being. But Richardson had seen the human behind those shots, and he knew that sometimes extraordinary talent appeared in the most unexpected packages. His next task was convincing his superiors that they'd just discovered something invaluable, something that could change how they approached specialized training and operations. The morning sun was getting higher, but Richardson sensed that the real heat was just beginning.